Well, hello everybody, this is Dear Mama Sa, and it's a very pleasant Tuesday morning, 11 degrees here in southern British Columbia. For those of you who like to convert it, that would be about 51 in northern Washington state, for those Americans who like to know what the temperature is doing. It's cloudy, but I can see some blue, which is a good sign. We like that. It's going to be a lot of the winter where I won't see too much blue, so I'm very, very grateful. We're continuing our discussion this week about perceptions and interpretation of what people say to us, because it's in that we trigger a great deal of our stress. And I am delighted that people are writing to me and telling me that they realize now that if they can interpret it in a different way, it's less painful. And the whole reason that we're going to be doing this, and I will continue to do it throughout the coming weeks, actually, in different ways, is because it helps you defend yourself. So many of us have been severely wounded by the words of others. We were taught as children that sticks and stones don't hurt your bones. Oh, it may hurt your bones, but words will never hurt you. Well, it's not true, is it? For many of us, words and people's judgment of us have hurt us very deeply. And part of the reason that we have been so deeply hurt is nobody ever taught us how to convert what is being said, or at least check what is being said. But you know, there's part of me that goes, sometimes I don't even want to check. You know what I mean? It's like, wow, that comes from a really nasty place there. I don't think I even want to check it. So I wonder what would have happened, you know, if I had learned to check it out with my mom. I think I would have been quite surprised and seen her very differently in a lot of ways. And bless her heart, she was a really good mum in lots of ways, and really lacking in lots of others, to be honest. But, you know, I just don't think anybody ever taught her. I believe that my mother ran scared most of her life, and she ran scared of losing what she had. In other words, she was married, and then my father ran off when she had 3 young children. And then she found a husband who had money, who also had 2 children. And you can imagine that to her was salvation. You know, it was like, wow. She didn't have to worry about getting the children educated, and I'm really grateful for that. And she didn't have to worry about it as long as she kept him happy. And so you look at it, and you realize that maybe she wasn't that happy. I don't know. I hope she was. And so then she transferred a lot of whatever her frustrations or her insecurities were onto the nearest weakest link, which would have been the children. And I wonder how many of us promised ourselves we would never do things to our children that our parents did to us. And that works really well until you catch yourself doing it. I've never had children, but I assure you, I've caught myself every now and then doing it to somebody else's child. You know, the look from hell, particularly. I'm very good at that. My mother taught me that one really well. And then I just apologize and say, sorry, that came from my mom. And it did. And there are a lot of things in our interpretations that come from our upbringing as well. I mean, how were you taught to deal with being angry? Were you told you weren't allowed to be angry? Were you told how to be angry in a healthy way? Were you taught that? Angry is this, you know, it's a natural thing. And I believe that part of our problem is that a lot of our depression, I believe, is anger turned inwards on ourselves. You know, where we haven't learned how to externalize it, so we internalize it. Especially for those of us who perhaps we're taught, you know, little girls should be seen and not heard. That sort of doctrine. You know, you had to be a nice person. And being a nice person means, for a lot of people, that you've got to keep people happy. Well, no, it's not true. You don't have to keep people happy. It's not your job. So, think, if you will, today about how many things you have done in your life where you did it because you didn't want to upset somebody, or you were trying to keep somebody happy. And I'd be really interested to hear some of your examples of that one. It is very difficult to actually stand your ground for what you believe or don't believe. And it also is very difficult to stand against, for example, your family. And let's say that you have a totally different political belief than your family does. Well, that makes that very difficult. What happens if your family is very traditional and you decide to marry outside your family traditions? Very difficult. That I was really delighted to get a note on yesterday was one of our viewers who did a great job of not taking something personally. I had reason to ask them to change their behavior slightly if possible, to request it, not can't demand it, because I'd had a couple of complaints. And this particular viewer took it wonderfully well about. And then the interesting thing was he also wrote back and said that he'd been asking his friends, I gather, whether he did the same to them, or whether he was perceived to have these sort of actions to his friends. And one of his friends really told him exactly what they thought. And it wasn't all nice, quite honestly. But the incredible thing was that he actually looked at all that they said. Instead of defending it all, he said to me, you know, I've been looking at what was said and I think some of it may be true. Wow! That is so awesome. In other words, they actually heard the words of a friend, not the words of an enemy. You know, this person genuinely was telling, that's only their opinion, remember that. Whatever anybody says about you is only their opinion. But the interesting thing was, he didn't just defend it, he looked at it and went, you know, some of that might be true. In which case, what do I want to do to change that? Great! I was so impressed. And so it's really important not to see everything as a negative. Some of it can be very, very positive. So I encourage you to look at what you're repeating that you were taught that maybe wasn't the best thing. For example, when you're busy and somebody interrupts you, what is your reaction? Do you snap at them? Do you give them the look from hell? And just start looking at that and just say, okay, fine. That's pretty violent stuff that we do, if you like. You know what I mean? We don't mean to. It's just like our concentration was elsewhere. So if you accidentally do it, apologize for it. I'm a good one on that one, by the way. I get deeply engrossed. The other thing is, I'm partially deaf now. And so sometimes I am so engrossed in what I'm doing, but I also don't hear somebody approach me if I'm deeply engrossed as well. And they'll suddenly talk and I nearly die of fright. And so that becomes a problem because I react from a place of shock or fear. And I just have to go, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you coming. I got quite the fright. And then people understand that. We interpret a lot of negativity in our lives. We do. It's not necessarily sent, although quite a bit of it is, don't get me wrong. But if we can look at the messages, in other words, if somebody gives you the look from hell, you know, interpret that. Just go, I am so sorry. I can tell by the, you know, the shock, you know, the look on your face that I have taken your train of thought away from what you were doing. Sorry, there was some stuff going on the roads. And you know, I will always look after my safety before I look after the vlog. Anyway, so, you know, you can just go, hey, I'm sorry. I obviously disturbed you from being deep in thought and I apologize. However this, and get the heck out of there fast, you know. The other thing that I love is if somebody gives me the toot, you know what I mean, the look from hell or the snappiness or whatever, depending on who it is, and I will qualify that in a moment, but depending who it is, I'll go back about an hour later and go, okay, I saw that you did X, Y, and Z, or I heard you sound pretty upset. Was it something that I did? Have I done something to create that? I don't do it in the moment, because in the moment you can already tell that they're pretty upset. And also I found that most people, if you give them an hour, they calm down a bit and that they don't feel the same. And 9 times out of 10 they go, oh God, no, that wasn't you. This had just happened. And or they don't tell you, which is also fine. But 9 times out of 10, and occasionally I hear, actually, yes, you know, you snapped at me, and I go, I did, or I gave them the look. And I've taught people around me, if I do it, you know, feel free to react, because it's bad manners on my part. So with certain people that I trust, I really appreciate that when they call me on it, because it's not what I want to be doing. I want to communicate better. And that is really the bottom line about all that we'll be talking about. I think so much of our life is about communication. It's not that I don't like you, right? So much of the communication sounds like I don't like you. It's not true. I might not like your behavior. It's a whole different story. I always am really careful with children to remind them, I love you to bits. What you just did, not so much. Don't like that behavior, but I love you. So be aware. And tomorrow, or today, depending on what time you listen to this, really think about how many of your reactions, how many of your communication skills were learned, and maybe they're not the ones you want to be doing. I've got one viewer who every other word is a swear word, or very rarely do we get a communication that doesn't have a lot of swear words in it. Well, that's okay, except I also have other viewers who come to the broadcast who are deeply religious and Christian or whatever, and don't do swearing well. They're very tolerant, but it's just like, okay, fine. Wonder if I can ask you just to turn that down a bit. Whoops. If I need a Kleenex now, it's on the floor. This is Dear Mama Sal saying, have a great day, be aware of what you're saying and doing, communicate better, and look after one another. I'm sending a virtual hug to those who need it. Bye-bye for now.